So, welcome to the talk. I'm still black and you're still racist, aka how you can address your anti-black racism. So, for those who don't know me, my name's Brandy Foster. I'm the mother of two black boys, progeny of both the enslaved and enslaver in the United States, and a Detroit Labs team member of 5 years now, go Betas, where I'm an Android app developer and our diversity and inclusion coach. So this is going to be a hard talk, hard for me to give, hard for you to hear. We are going to talk about race, racism, and specifically touch on some instances of gender racism. So I hear this a lot because it's true. I do talk about race a lot, but I think to understand where I'm coming from, you have to understand where I came from. See, I was the first little black girl in an all-white block. My friends were kids of parents who had as kids probably would not have let me sit on their swing set. And I remember that swing set. It was blue and red, and the little blue-eyed girl looked at me and said she heard I was descended from monkeys. The sound of her head hitting that pole echoes through my head to this day. But my mama said, never hit a little white girl in her face. Her skin can't hide the mark. Her parents were upset, their faces as blue and as red as that set, but I will never forget that the very same kids I called friends went home to evening meals where they heard tales that I was genetically inept, judged for the skin I was born in. That's why I ignore those tales to watch out for the monsters inside of your closets and be wary of the ones underneath your bed, because truthfully, I'm more worried about the monsters trying to get inside of my head. See, truthfully, I'm more wary of the monsters that tell me that the perfection of my reflections is something that should be feared, or that having any pride in the skin I was born in is something akin to racism. Reversed, racism akin to the skin I was born in, I did not have a say. Though if I did, I might ask to have the shade replaced. See, maybe I'd rather be blue, or perhaps even green. No, better yet, I'd ask my entire flesh be turned into a mood ring so then you could see what I was feeling. Perhaps then you could see that the flesh that covers my heart is truly just a covering. Maybe then the racist would take the time to get to know me. Racist. So we have some idea, some opinion about what is a racist, right? KKK members marching the streets of Washington. White nationalists marching the streets of Charlottesville. Dylan Roof, who assassinated 9 members at the AME church. The El Paso Walmart shooter, who was terrified of a Hispanic invasion. But at this moment, we've come to find that racist is kind of a slur, right? It's a word we don't like to use. And we think we know what racism is. It is a thing of the past, though this graph shows that as of 2012, about 62% of white respondents said that the cause of disparities were that black people weren't trying hard enough. And it ended, right, with the Emancipation Proclamation that freed only slaves in the Confederate States, if you did not know that. I want to use the clicker. Or in 1865 with the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery except for punishment for a crime, which is why today we find that there are more black men incarcerated or entangled in the carcerated state as there were enslaved in 1850. But definitely with 64, right? With the Civil Rights Act. Though it was just in 2016 that a judge had to force a school to desegregate. And they say that racism, talking about it, is what perpetuates it. And it might be true. This chart you're looking at here was from an epidemiologist, David Chase, I believe his name is. His research team found that there was a relationship between where the word nigger is Googled and death in black people. There's only one race, though, right? The human race. We hear that all the time. We all have team agreements, or most people, right? We have teams have team agreements. Have you ever thought about how they relate to our laws? So team agreements set expectations for how team members should treat each other and sets accountability standards and processes. and are made to be like reviewed and updated, right? Team agreement written once, you're supposed to look it over every year, but more importantly, as your team needs. And our laws also do the same thing, right? They set expectations for how citizens should behave and treat one another. There are consequences for failing to meet those expectations, i.e., there's accountability. And supposedly, they are made to be reviewed and updated as needed for the health of society. But I'd like you to think about racism as a living document. So you might not know, but racism was actually legalized in our laws as of 1705. The slave codes of Virginia had created chattel slavery, made that slavery hereditary, and tied it to the race. And then we legalized racism in our laws. By 1896, we find that citizenship was limited to white persons. The first time that showed up in law, I believe, was 1792. We fought a whole civil war, like a whole last war, to free the slaves, even though, again, the emancipation only freed slaves in the Confederate States. And then we abolished slavery. Shout out to Reconstruction. If you did not know, that is where that 13th Amendment comes from. RIP also, because it didn't last very long. States then began to legalize racial segregation in almost all forms of public life. So we're talking school, health, housing, everything. So people say, I'm not racist, though. I just don't believe folks should mix, right? There should be a separation between coloreds and whites. But racism, though it feels like a bad word, and racist feels like a bad word, that's just because we've started to tie it to the idea of evil, bad, right? We want to tie it to intentions and hearts. But really, racism is just a structure that organizes races into a hierarchy. So where do you fall? And it can make us feel defensive because of that. And I get it, right? No one wants to be declared a bad person. But really, racists are just people who uphold that hierarchy through their actions or inactions. And I say all that, and it's like, oh my God, we should just quit, right? Like, obviously, this is hopeless. And I get that, right? There's a Harvard professor, Derek Bell, who wrote Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And in that, he put up a theory that racism wasn't just a quilt in our fabric, but the actual thread that holds it all together. That's a heavy thing to think about, because if racism is that integral to us, to the United States, that means it's literally like a part of our DNA. And to untangle it, to undo that, wouldn't that mean we'd have to undo ourselves altogether? The irony, I like to think of learning, at least for me, is that the more I know, the more I do often despair. So reading the works of Derek Bell was really challenging to my point of view. But he ends his book on what I think is the most hopeful note, right? That the work of undoing racism, the work of anti-racism, isn't for a cookie. It isn't for a promised land. It is for the righteousness of that work, for our deep-held beliefs in equality. You are. All of you, I am. We are all racist. We have all, through just living in this world, absorbed racist, anti-black beliefs. I want you to think about something, right? Just a little different. Because you might not be doing anything, right? You're thinking, well, I don't hate black people. I don't purposefully avoid them on the street. I'm just floating along in the world, doing my best, being the best person. But if you're in the boat, even if you're not rowing, you're heading in the same direction. We've already established that race and racism is codified in our laws, a part of our fabric. So if you want to do something different, you have to do something courageous. You got to jump out the boat. And once you get out that boat and into the water, you will easily see that the propellers that keep us moving forward slash into water and flesh the same way. And that bottom of that sturdy boat that was holding you up is the same one that is holding people down. And that you were so busy looking at your horizon the horizon before you that you didn't notice that other people didn't get that view. You'll also see that that broke doing all that work to hold everyone back is slowing the whole thing down. No one is winning in this race. So you jump in, you know stuff now, you're seeing things, but really you're just kind of treading water, right? Where do you go? How do you be anti-racist? What does that even mean? So I have to pause here and acknowledge that I'm not an expert in any of this. I have to purposely shout out to the many critical race theorists that I read, that I follow, and just like black women really in the world just doing their thing. It is from them that this talk comes from. So who are you? More importantly, what if I told you you are not who you think you are? What if I said that what you know of who you are is really just the tip of the iceberg, the second iceberg slide? You guys see that? We're all in the same, 2 poems, 2 icebergs. Like, that's how you know we're labbers. What if I said that what you think you know about yourself is really just the tip of an iceberg? Right? We go along, and what we think we are, or who we think we are, is really what psychologists would call your system 2. Right, and that system handles complex operations, your self-control, and it's why you think that's who you are. But in reality, the main driver of you is your system 1. That system is just working on taking input, spitting out output based on its models. So what if I said that in order to be anti-racist, start to undo some of those things, you have to confront that you don't know who you are. You know some of who you are, you know some of what you do, but you don't really know what's driving you. Which brings us here. Once we make that acknowledgement, once we're like, we are not the wholly logical, thoughtful beings we think we are, we have a whole set of operations that is guiding 90% of our activity, we can start this work. So I like to think of our biases, our system 1, as just running on stories, right? There's a bunch of stories in your head that started being written long before you came into existence, and they are what's guiding your everyday life. Such as, if you were born to white parents, it is very likely that your mother received adequate care, that she got pain medication if she needed it, right? She was treated as a whole being, creating a whole nother being. Whereas if you were born to a black mother, your mother was not likely to get adequate care. And if you didn't know, if your mother had you before Medicare, you were probably born in a segregated hospital, because it was the Medicare, the push for Medicare that really got hospitals to desegregate. That was after the Civil Rights Bill, if you, timeline-wise. Your mother was also not likely to get the pain medication that she needed. Studies have shown that doctors, even today, think that black people have better pain tolerance and thicker skin. And if you were in school and you were a white child, you learned a lot about you and a lot about your history and a lot about how awesome your people were who came from, Europe and conquered this land and helped these savage people understand civilization. And if you were not white, you learned the same things, the exact same things. But you also learned that your people were the savages, that the very blood, even a drop of it if you were black, had the ability to taint a whole line of people. So we have these stories in our head, and we very rarely even think about them. We're just going about our daily life. We think when we see a group of black children, our system 1 goes, oh, you should grab your purse, lock your car door, be extra cautious. And we do those things, but we don't think about why. That's because those stories, I'm sorry, because I really got to grab some water. Those stories are only being read by your system 1. They are driving you, and you are not challenging them. So the first thing I'd like you to do is stop. Like literally, just stop. Stop moving. Stop pretending. And just face the fact that you are an automaton. And you were been programmed, and this might all be an illusion, right? Maybe it's the Matrix. A thing that can help us understand where those stories are, though, is some objective measures. So the first thing I want to talk about is the implicit bias test. Harvard has one that's online. And what that test does is help you understand if you make automatic associations to things and people, or ideas in people, such as black and good, white and bad, vice versa, right? Whether or not you associate, let's say, the Islamic faith with terrorism. I will caveat here that even the creators have shown that this is a test that has to be taken in aggregate, right? So taking it one time, and if you see an association towards white people, that does not mean you are a hateful racist and you should just grab a white cloak. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that that is an area you should look at, right? That's what that's going to do. Now, if you want to, you can take it aggregate, take the same test multiple times, space it out over a course of weeks, and kind of average it all together. But I do suggest you take the race and the color AIT. Why both? Well, studies have also shown that some people that show no implicit bias in race show such in color, right? Because we have both those things working in our society. Another thing I want to encourage you to do is do some unconscious bias training. The one I first suggest is Kerwin. They have a really great, really easy to understand unconscious bias training that is available online for free. And they cover pretty much all the same things I did. Your system one, and why you're biased, and why that doesn't mean you're a bad person, and then also how to mitigate those things, which I think is the most important part. Start here. I am finishing up creating training materials for myself for unconscious bias. If anyone is interested in being an alpha or beta tester, hit me up, let me know. And it is from that that I am going to move into this next part, which I'm calling racism knowledge and an action plan, right? Things that I think you could do today that could help you continue on this road. So, actively challenge your anti-black racism. Root out the whys of your anti-black bias. Now, if you grew up in an all-white neighborhood and had very few neighbors of color, odds are most of the opinions you got about people of color came from media, what your family said, what your school said. So ask yourself, where did I grow up and how did that influence my perceptions? What did my teachers say about black people? Did I learn black history? And if I did, was it relegated to only the month of February? Why? Once you start getting to the roots, you should check in to see what you've carried forward, right? Are you still living in a predominantly white neighborhood? Do your children go to predominantly white schools? Does your family continue to say racist things in front of you? Is your media still made up of mostly white creators? And then get out of your comfort zone. You can do this by enriching your entertainment. So, like, literally check your physical bookshelves. I was talking about the mental ones now. Go to the physical bookshelf. Who are you reading? DVD rack? Do people still have DVDs? I don't know. Look at your Netflix queue, I guess, is like more relevant to the times. I do still have a lot of DVDs. I will never get rid of them. They're like books to me. I love them. But who are the creators of the material that you are consuming? Purposefully seek out black creators that are talking about black life from a black perspective. You can find them. They are great. Some of my favorites, Octavia Butler, W.E.B. Du Bois. If you like music, Duke Ellington. I mean, any blues genre actually pretty much will take you there. But do it on purpose, right? Seek out this entertainment. Oh, I missed a thing. And get out of your comfort zone. Like, do that actually. Like, not as a joke. Like, literally go to a place where you are not in the majority. Sit in a room full of black people, take up only the space you need for your body, and just, like, exist and absorb. Sorry. Research the cultures. Now, odds are, again, if you were educated in the United States of America, you had a white supremacist education. But you don't have to like stick with it, right? Like we have technology today that you can literally go like pull out your phone out right now and Google, let's say Kush. Do you know what Kush is? Kush is an empire that was in the African continent before Rome. It was great civilization. We don't know about that because we're not taught about that even when we take world history, right? So do that on purpose. Learn what you haven't learned before. Also, I encourage you to learn more about race and racism in the context of the United States. White Rage by Carol Anderson is fantastic. Stamped from the Beginning by, I'm going to say his name wrong, Kendi X. Ibram. Don't tell him Ibram X. Kendi. See, I always mix it up. Don't tell him I said that. Don't tweet to him, because he finally tweeted me back, and so I feel special, and if you tell him I messed up his name, he might not ever tweet at me again. But both those books explore the historic race and racism and can really help you understand what you are seeing today. Follow and listen to Black people. Check your social media. Who do you follow? There are so many just Black folks sharing Black life, Black culture, Black perspectives, and more importantly, how to sink the ship of white supremacy like today on your Twitter. And they're doing it mostly for the free, though many of them do have Patreon. Pay it. Like, go ahead. $1 tip every now and then does not hurt. But do that so you can really understand where Black folks are coming from today. There's at Angry Black Lady, Kim Creighton, one. Careful with that one. Like, definitely. Like, just follow her. Don't tweet at her. I wouldn't suggest you do that, but just follow because she has a lot of really great information. Find your tribe. Find people who are your kinfolk, who are doing this work also, right? Come together with them so you guys can process this learning together. It is hard. Like, as a Black person, it is hard to be anti-racist. It is hard to undo anti-Black bias in myself. If you are not a Black person, it's going to be even more challenging, especially if you feel alone. So find people who are doing this work with you, sit with them, and use that as the space to kind of talk about your challenges, because what you don't want to do is kind of like bemoan how hard this is with like the Black people who you're becoming friends with. That won't go well. You can't talk to me, though. I am the diversity inclusion coach. That is my whole job. I promise I won't side-eye you. Like, we can have those conversations, but, like, not a random Black person on the street. Don't do that. Start having difficult conversations. So, yes, talking about race and racism is hard. Even saying the words race and racism is hard, right? So do some learning. There's some books that are really great. So you want to talk about race. I'm going to butcher her name, especially because my mouth is dry. Find the book. Race Talk is also a really great book that talks about how to have better conversations about race with all kinds of people, but particularly people of color. And once you start doing that learning, start having those hard conversations. Talk to Black people about their Black experiences. Talk to white people about Black people's Black experience. Talk to white people about white people's white supremacy. Have conversations that are hard, but be courageous. Most importantly, you're going to mess this up. Oh, you're going to. At some point, you're just going to be like driving along, and some like random thought's going to pop into your head. You're going to be like, oh, Brandy, you like rap music, right? And I do, but like, why do you assume that I like rap music? So now I'm a little offended, and you've realized that you've made a mistake. Get good at apologizing. That's like saying get good at feedback, right? Like, it's not that easy. So what does that look like? First, understand that intentions are less than impact, right? Intentions don't matter as much as how you impacted this other person. I know we're used to saying, I only meant. No one cares what you meant when you've hurt them, at least not in that moment, right? Then own that impact. So say, oh, Brandy, I realized I just impacted you by, with a microaggression, assuming that you like Black music because you're Black. And then what is black music, right? You're going to keep making mistakes. It's fine. Because then you just apologize for the impact. You know what? I'm going to stop here. I'm really sorry that I impacted you that way. That's it. That's the whole sentence. Right? Again, your intentions matter to you. So then what you do is you go home and you say, God, how did my intentions become so mismatched with the impact? What could I do better next time when I have such good intentions, right? How can I change my behavior so my intentions are showing up in the impact that I am having? And once you're doing this work and you're getting this practice in, then you can start rippling your effects, right? You can start bringing what you're learning and what you're doing into your everyday life. Dr. Ibram says that an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. As in, you are racist. You don't have to be. It's not a forever condition, right? You can be anti-racist, but you don't have to be, and that's not a forever condition. And so it is, again, how we are showing up every day that determines if we're being racist or anti-racist. So how can we bring it to life? Bystander intervention. This is really when you're using your actual presence to advocate. In the workplace, what could this look like? This could look like if Brandy's up for a promotion and the panel's talking about it and they go, oh man, Brandy's really aggressive though. I don't know if the team's going to really take to that. And you could say, oh, okay, you could ask a question, right? Well, what do you mean by aggressive? Do you have specific examples of aggressive behavior we can talk about? You can highlight any inconsistencies. So when Dan was up, you said he was aggressive, and that was great. Why is it not great when Brandy's aggressive? And if you're feeling courageous and in a comfortable environment, you can push all the way. Things like that have been systematically used to hold black women back from positions of power. And so we should really just focus on concrete things. If there's any part of her behavior that does not meet the rubric for the position, let's talk about that, and let's try to keep our biases out of it. You can also do this in the street. I will say do this with care. I was going to wait till the end, but I'm going to pause here. I'm going to email out more detailed steps for everything, and it includes the link that goes here. But bystander intervention in the streets is something you should be careful about. But what that could look like is if you see someone suffering from racial harassment, let them know you see it. Eye contact. I see what's going on. See if they need your help. Listen to what they say, because it might be an instance where they're like, no, I'm good. Respect that. If they're like, yeah, could you stand here? Do that if you're able. If they say no, but you're worried that this might get violent, stay back and observe. And the thing we never want to happen is that we have to make a police report. But in case we do, let's pay attention to who this attacker is. What are they wearing? How tall are they? What is their gender? What is their race? We can't be afraid to acknowledge those things. Leverage and share your actual power. Now, we all have some level of power and privilege. Our society says that some people have more. Take what you do have and leverage it in service of others. Call it out. So this is you actually using your voice to challenge the system. And I know call-out culture has got a bad rap, but I really believe that silence is complicity. So silence in the face of racism is in that moment you're being racist, right? You're agreeing, you're in the boat, you're going along. So what could this look like in the office? This could look like you saying, hey, we don't have any black people in leadership. Is this something leadership teams thought about? Right, just asking the question, not, hire Brandy on a leadership team, though if you want to do that, we can talk about that later. But just raising that question, right? You see it, that's an inconsistency. We talk about things, just calling it out. It can be literally just that simple. In the streets, so I hear from a lot of white people that have racist uncles right? Like every white person has a racist uncle. I had a racist grandfather, R.I.P. I love him, but he was horribly anti-black racist, right? He did not like anything black. Like he literally would refuse to take his car to a black mechanic. Like it was deep. And so I get calling out our family members, our loved ones is like hard, right? You don't want to be the one to ruin dinner, right? But do it anyway. And I'm not saying you got to like flip over tables. I mean, if that's your jam, whatever, I'm not going to judge you. But you could just ask a question, right? Your uncle's on that tirade again, black on black crime is up in Detroit. You could say, why don't we ever say white on white crime? You point out the inconsistency, right? Well, white on white violence is like statistically the same as black on black violence, and this is per the DOJ. So why is this phrase being used? Why do you think it's different, Uncle, Mr. Racist? And if you're really hardcore, you could be like, you know what? That's some white supremacist language right there. And if you are worried about black on black violence, if you're worried about violence, there's a whole bunch of initiatives in Detroit right now. There's a whole bunch of people doing work to reduce violence right now. Why don't we pull out your phone and look those up? So I'm encouraging to use your voice to declare your space, the space around you, anti-racist. And we need to practice inclusivity. This is where you use your influence to push for inclusive measures, policies, procedures. What does that look like? So in the office, team agreements. Like I love team agreements. I believe that they are a place where we could most easily use our power and our voice to practice inclusivity. When we're writing that, and it's not just about like, we're gonna show up at 9, not really though. Make that 10, make that 11. What time stand up? Let's make stand up 2. It's that, but it's also how do we make a decision? How do we know when a decision has been reached? And even more importantly, what do we do when someone breaks this agreement? What do we want to do? And it might sound like it's not super comfortable to talk about that in the beginning, but I promise you, having that in writing makes it really easy to refer back to, right? You can hold each other accountable when you're like, hey, we said we were doing the 1 mic rule. Right now you're breaking the team agreement because you keep talking over another team member. And I really encourage teams that if you have people of color, black people on your team, that you really uplift their voice in these team agreement conversations. They are the ones who are most likely to be discriminated against, marginalized in the team, especially in meetings. Voices are very easy, except for mine, to get drowned out, right? That's what studies have shown over and over again. So really uplift that, ask questions, make sure that your team agreement is inclusive of the most vulnerable people on your team. In the streets, wherever you live, your neighborhood, do you know if your neighborhood had racial compacts? Like if the house you lived in had a racial compact? Because there's a huge percentages of houses, especially in the suburbs of Detroit, that had those very compacts. You cannot sell your house to a black person. How do you think that affects your neighborhood makeup today? Bring that up at your next neighborhood association meeting, right? Like I did this research, I found this thing, and maybe that's why we literally have 2 black people on the block and they live in the same house and they just keep rotating in and out. Like maybe there's a reason here that we should address. What about your school? Even if you don't have kids, but especially if you have kids, you have a lot of power in that. What is your school's racial discrimination in punishment? I promise you it exists, but how bad is it? Ask them. Ask them that, literally, again, speaking truth to power, asking that question is extremely powerful. Why is it that black kids here are punished more strictly than white kids for the same incidents? But more importantly, the best way to use this power is literally anyone who can legislate. Like anyone. Your police commissioner, your mayor, your neighborhood association block club captain, right? This person is making decisions for where you live. Push them all to be inclusive, literally. Demand answers, ask a lot of questions, and don't take no for an answer. refuse to live in spaces that are exclusive, that are exclusive. Jesus Christ. I'm working on it, y'all. I'm working. So, I don't want to be here, right? I don't want to be in a space, I don't want to be in a world where we are racist or anti-racist, where we are black or white, skinny, tall, short, where we are just constantly dividing ourselves up into smaller and smaller pieces. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be thinking about how to balance these scales of inequality, how to make our world more equal. Like, we should just be able to exist, to just be humans, right? Human beings being the best or worst humans we can be in our spaces. But that's not where we are. We are here. We are in a country that has legislated race, a space where, yes, we are all human, and there is only one technical race, but the social construct we've created as race matters. And we can't pretend that it doesn't. And there are people who are being harmed today and every day because of that construct. And in truth, right, I'm probably not going to live to see it. I'm not going to live to see the day where I don't have to worry about my black sons driving in the suburbs. I'm not going to live to see a day where there's not racial inequalities in our prison system, in our hospitals, in our every single day life. I won't live to see it. My kids probably won't live to see it. But I don't do this work, again, because I hope I will be rewarded. I do this work because I love Star Trek. No, I'm not lying. I deserve Star Trek. Our world deserves Star Trek. And in order for us to see new civilizations, we've got to fix ours first. So that's the talk. Again, I'll send out some tips. I'm open to talking about any of this content later. I do thank you all for your time, attention, and vulnerability in this space. I think it's time for lunch.